Perfecto. All right, live streaming. All right, good evening, everyone. At 6:04, we will convene this meeting of the Mountain View Westminster School District. Please. At this time, we'll do the call to order and pledge, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America
and to the republic for which it stands, one
nation,
under God, indivisible, with
liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everyone. And we'll move on now to roll call.
Ellen Wheeler.
Laura
Jose
Blakely.
Gutierrez Jr. Oh, sorry, Laura.
Devin Conley.
And Tamara Wilson. Let the record reflect that all 5 trustees are present. And then we'll move on now to the item 1C, approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
I move.
You guys are fast.
Okay, second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Can a motion made by trustee Blakely and seconded by trustee Gutierrez. The approval of the agenda passes unanimously and the silencing of the phone has occurred. We'll move on now for opportunities for members of the public to address the board concerning items on the closed session agenda. Are there any members of the public, Dr. Rudolph or Nancy, who would like to address us at this time?
There's only one person who's not in staff member, so they just need to raise their hand if they want to comment on something on closed session. All right, I think we're good.
I don't see any hands raised here. Okay, and so at this time at 6:06, we will move on to closed session. Thank you.
Give me 1 second.
lost a trustee. Maybe I can't see him. Oh, there he is. Okay. Did it go? All right, it looks like everyone's here. So at 6:36, we will reconvene this meeting of the Mountain View Wisconsin School District Board of Trustees. I'd like to report out that we unanimously approved settlement agreement related to student number 145-704-7348. The settlement resolves a student's claim regarding special education placement through the end of the 2020-2021 school year. And now we will move on to consent agenda. May I have a motion?
I move that we, oh, sorry, Ellen, go ahead.
Go ahead, Laura.
I move that we approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, and a motion moved by trustee Blakely and seconded by trustee Wheeler. The consent agenda passes unanimously. We'll move on now to communications from employee organizations. Are there any members on the call or on the phone?
Nope. We're good.
We'll move on then to district committees. Nothing? Okay.
I have a question.
Trustee Gutierrez?
Thank you, Madam President. So Dr. Rudolph and Dr. Chang, has the DLAC schedule been finalized yet? And if so, will we be getting an email indicating what the dates are going to be and the time?
Yes, the schedules have been finalized. It's on the district calendar, but we will send you an email.
Thank you.
And Jeff, when you say send you an email, you're going to send the trustee
You
an
all,
email?
excuse me.
And also members of the DLACs?
Committee.
Yes.
Thank you, thank you.
All right, we'll move on now then to superintendent.
All right, I just want to, you approved this today, but I just wanted to make a thank you to the Pure Good Foundation. So just a little background, the Pure Good Foundation made a donation of $10,220, specifically for the use of purchasing school supplies for students who may be homeless in transitional housing who have been identified as needing a little extra help at this time. In addition to that, they noted that any additional funds beyond the cost of purchasing school supplies can be used at the discretion of staff to aid the families of these students. So just wanted to say thank you to Pure Good Foundation for their generous donation.
Yes.
And then the only other update I have is we have a community check-in tomorrow. I actually don't have my calendar in front of me, so I'm not really sure what time. I think it's 3:30 and ends at 4:30. That's it.
Thank you, Dr. Rudolph. I didn't print this out, so my apologies as I work between windows. So we'll move on now to item under community comments. This is the time reserved for community members to address the board on items that are not on the agenda. The board and administration welcome this opportunity to listen. However, in compliance with the Brown Act, the board is not permitted to take action on non-agenda items. I had heard at the beginning of the meeting that we have two people who would like to address the board at this time.
We have two public comments that were sent in, and I'm not sure if someone online wants to raise their hand, then they will be allowed to make a comment here.
So if there's a person either on the Zoom call or on the phone, I guess they would have had to have emailed. So anyone on the Zoom call, I'll open up the participant window, and if you have your hand raised, this is the time to speak on items that are not on tonight's agenda. So please raise your hand if that's you.
We're good.
I don't, seeing as there are none, and we have 10 minutes, I mean, I don't know how long the comments are, but we can have someone read them. I don't know if you have a
Yep.
designee. Okay.
So the first one is from Kathleen Puglisi. I apologize for butchering the last name. With regards to distance learning, I will strongly advocate for one, longer recess and lunch break so that students have time to eat and move their bodies. And two, shorter Zoom sessions. My first grader is fully engaged in the first daily Zoom session, 75 minutes. She is semi-engaged in second session, also 75 minutes. And she is frustrated that she has to be on Zoom for the entire afternoon session, 2 hours. Who has the authority to adjust the length of breaks and the time students, particularly young students, spend on Zoom each day? Who do we make our case to? The board, the principal, the teacher? Thank you. Kathy Puglisi Chan, parent of a Mistral first grader. Second one is from Poonam Singh, the board members and Superintendent Rudolph. I know you may never get enough people saying thank you to you all. So I just wanted to take 2 minutes to say thank you. When I saw all the materials that each of my 2 children received and their computers and just the opportunity to learn, I was really moved. I thought about how much work must have gone into making sure every child got that in our district. My dad grew up poor and fought for an education to learn and would study with a pencil and borrow a textbook underneath a street life. Do not take for granted how lucky we are to have an education, despite having to do it on distance learning. I think farm workers right now who are picking food for us to eat and have children who also need to learn, I thank you for prioritizing equity and ensuring all children across the district are served. As a passionate equity warrior myself and social justice community leader, I look forward to the equity meeting on Thursday. Poonam Singh, mom of 2 students at Stevenson.
Thank you, Dr. Rudolph. Should we comment on the first comment, which is that the person should approach the teacher and the site principal if there's issues with the classroom or child? I know that's the gist of emails I've been sending is I think the teachers would be happy to work with individual families. And this is all sort of an evolving process as we're on day 4. So, okay. Since we're not taking action, I think it's okay to say that. We'll move on now to item 8 under review and action. And this is the pool of architects to propose on district's construction projects. Dr. Westover?
Evening. So this is to create a pool of architects for Measure T. We have 6 architects that were selected after going through a proposal process.
Okay. Are there questions from trustees on this item?
Yes, so when I'm looking at the rubric that was kind of drawn up to review the architects, it's not entirely clear to me how points are allocated based on the different categories. There's a total number of points, but I don't see anything that says, for proximity of offices within 25 miles, it is 2 points. Within this many miles, it's that many points. So I'm a little like I appreciate that there are values and there's criteria, but I don't actually understand how the scoring to the criteria is done.
Good question. So unlike when we score student papers where we have like anchor papers that we have for each score that you would assign to a student, this is a little bit more subjective. So what you pick for most of the areas, so for example, technical expertise, it depending on who is reviewing it, they may score it differently, and which is one of the reasons we had multiple people evaluating it. So we had another CBO, we had construction managers, Ron Wheelahan, who's a consultant for the district that worked at a county, was also part of it because everyone is viewing it through their own lens. So that's part of the process. For the distance from our school district, so in the request for proposals we put out, they had to be within a certain range. So we couldn't have somebody, let's say, that's up in Seattle, because sometimes we need people to be able to come on site.
I wasn't concerned about that, like
Right.
specific criteria, but
Yes.
just in general. It would be nice if in the future, just for the public who are viewing this, if we could include that information about, this many different people reviewed this to just kind of make the process a little bit clearer.
No problem.
Thank you.
I have a question. It does say that 6 firms scored the highest. And I did ask about this in my one-on-one, but I know they're not ranked in the 1 to 6 in the list, but it says only 2 were interviewed. Is that because we worked with the rest prior, or what's the rationale behind that?
Yes, because the other ones we had worked with in the past.
So the only reason for the 2 is these are new firms that you're under consideration. Okay.
Correct.
Thank you. Trustee Gutierrez, I saw your hand.
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. Yes, I was going to just comment exactly on that, and I'll just piggyback off of that. And if in the future, a humble suggestion is to also note that, so that when the community is reading this background information, they have an idea also as to whom we've worked with in the past and whom we haven't. That's all.
No problem.
Thank you.
Other questions from trustees? Are there members of the public who would wish to address the board on this item? I don't know if Nancy's on there or who could. Let me see if I can pull up.
No, there's no one that wants to make a public comment on this.
Okay, so we'll move on to a motion. Trustee Wheeler?
No, I was pointing at Laura. Go ahead, Laura.
Oh.
I was doing the same. I move that the Board of Trustees approve the above list of architecture firms to be in the district's pool of architecture firms for the projects based on the district's procurement and selection process identified here.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, on a motion made by Trustee Blakely and seconded by Trustee Wheeler. The pool of architects to propose on district's construction projects passes unanimously. We'll move on now to item 9A. I'm sorry. Oh, I thought I heard something. I'm sorry. We'll move on now to item 9A, Measure T project list.
Right. I also have Jason Cave with us here tonight, just in case there are specific questions about some of the proposed projects. Okay. So going back to our strategic plan, one important thing is that we have good resource stewardship, that we make sure students, staff, and community members have access to adequate facilities and technology to fulfill the mission of the district. So this is part of that. Our master's facility plan, which the board approved on December 12th, 2019, is actually a 10-year master facility plan. There was a lot of feedback that went into the creation of it. Parents, teachers, staff, and the community were all involved in developing this plan over several months. The master facility plan prioritized health, safety, and operational efficiency, and it identified short-term needs or short-term growth as well as long-term growth. And one of the reasons we started working on the MFP, one was to update it, and then also in preparation for the potential passing of Measure T. So Measure T addresses the short-term growth, but not the long-term growth. So we have some positive news to share, that we have some reduced costs from the MFP estimates. So at the time that we created the master facility plan, all costs were escalated for the life of the bond or until October 2024. And because of COVID, the escalation has also slowed for now. So these cost savings could allow us to add needed items as priority 1 projects while still staying within our budget for Measure T. Additionally, the MFP was based on broad estimations. So when we looked at what are the needs, what is it that we need to improve on at our schools, it was looking from a very high level. And now that we're actually in the process of planning for some of the Measure T projects, we have a more defined scope, which is also reduce some of the costs. This is a list of priority 1 items that were identified in the MFP. So the 2 items that are in progress right now are perimeter controls and solar. So where are we right now with those items? So due to COVID-19, we started the process of installing perimeter controls and are awaiting DSA approval. Something that we need to continue to talk about is because this is a public work, we have to go through multiple different steps in order to make sure that we're adhering to the law and make sure that things are safe for students. Because we're a school district, we can't go out and hire somebody just to come in and put fencing in. There are lots of pieces in place that we have to make sure we're in compliance with. So right now for our perimeter controls, worst case scenario, we'll be ready in December, but we're doing everything we can to speed up the process. For solar, school communities have given feedback on where they would like the panels to be, as well. And we're also working with NG on specifics of the contract for solar. So addressing new needs. What are the new needs? 1, we need to add a parking cover at Vargas to protect cars and people from falling pine cones. So the trees in front of Vargas are beautiful, but we've also had a few broken windows due to the pine cones falling. No one's been hit at this point, but we're still want to provide additional protection from the pine cones. We also are looking at outdoor learning spaces due to COVID. So research suggests that being in an outdoor environment limits the spread of COVID. Currently, it's not a priority 1 item, but if the board decided, we could move it up as a priority 1 item. Outdoor learning space was a priority 3 item in the MFP. And right now we're hearing community feedback and focus groups, emails, on the reopening task force, and the board have all expressed interest in outdoor learning spaces. So how would we move forward with outdoor learning spaces? What would this look like? We would work with a landscape architect, community teachers and staff to get feedback on the types of designs that would fit the needs of students and teachers. And we really need to understand what we are looking for as a community, because outdoor learning spaces can look very different. They can be benches or stumps for students to sit on, very simplistic. They could be shade canopies, landscaping. They could be large structures. They could be partitions. Do we need to have a teaching board for demonstrations? So when we think of outdoor learning space, everyone has a different idea in mind. And there's currently no agreement on what an outdoor learning space looks like. If we start gathering feedback now, the outdoor learning spaces will not be ready until the start of the 21-22 school year. The design could dictate the location. Does a learning space need to have internet or access to power? And each site has a different amount of usable space available, so it may not be possible to have the same outdoor learning space at every campus. But based on the design that's chosen, the cost could also vary. So a potential process for feedback. We want to engage stakeholders, meaning families, staff, and principals, on what they're looking for in an outdoor learning space. Then work with a landscape architect to design potential options for our schools, have check-ins with the trustees and other stakeholders to give feedback on the designs. And of course, all the dates are to be determined. So what's the impact of changing the project list? So the board approved the MFP and the list of projects by priority. We learned some lessons from Measure G, that there should be consensus about the projects and priorities to avoid delays, confusion, and additional cost. It's also a way for us to be transparent about the process, but we also need to be efficient and flexible. So the new COVID environment presents some new needs. Using the current process requires the board to approve any changes for the MFP project list. It could be that not everyone agrees, and addressing new needs will cost about $8.5 million, but the MFP cost savings allow us to stay within budget. In addition, changes in projects may have unforeseeable costs and effects. So right now, this is an estimate of what we think we'll be able to do. We have some questions for the trustees that we'll come back to in just a few minutes. Should we move the Vargas parking cover and outdoor learning spaces to priority 1 projects? What are the most important considerations for outdoor learning spaces? What should be included? Shade, Wi-Fi, power, and how many students should be able to use the space? Are we looking for a small group, or are we looking for the whole class? Or is it an extension of the classroom, or is it an outdoor classroom for all the students? So our next steps. Staff recommends that we complete all priority 1 items from the MFP, and that we move outdoor learning and the parking cover at Vargas from a priority 3 item to a priority 1 item. This is what the new proposed project list will look like. And a tentative proposed timeline. Next steps would be at the September 3rd meeting, we'd bring back an amended project list for your review and action. And now back to our questions that we have. Should we move the Vargas parking cover and outdoor learning spaces to priority 1 projects? And
Okay, I think, would you like the trustees to weigh in at this time, Dr.
Yes.
Westover? Okay,
that would be great.
no worries, thank you. We'll make the rounds because this is the time for questions. So whoever would like to go first, let me know. Trustee Gutierrez?
Thank you. Just one question. When we look at this issue, this is going to be looked at and assessed at every single school site. Is that true?
Correct. You mean for the
You're talking about the outdoor learning spaces?
Yes, sir. I'm just trying to verify that that's true for not only the elementary schools, but also middle schools and preschool.
Yes, the plan is to have everyone involved.
Thank you.
Trustee Gutierrez, do you want to go through the questions or we just?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no worries.
Unless there's other questions, I don't know from the board.
Well,
I think everybody's going to weigh in on these. I think this is what the information that they would like from us on slide 27.
Got it.
could we take public comment before we do that?
We usually have questions from trustees.
Right.
I have a question. I don't know if
Okay,
anybody
Laura.
else does. The slide that was on page 24 with the proposed project list.
Yeah, I couldn't see it.
Sure. Let me go back.
There, that one. Is that the priority? Like it lists a whole bunch of, is that where it is now, or what? Is the order,
Sure.
does the order there mean anything? Or is it just
Order
kind of
does
how-
not
where they
mean
went?
anything. These are all priority 1 items that were identified in the MFP with the addition of the Vargas parking cover and the outdoor learning spaces.
Okay. And then when you said there was an additional 8.5 million,
So that's the Vargas parking cover and the outdoor learning spaces added together.
so the Vargas parking cover was a completely new item that we hadn't anticipated, but we talked about shade structures for lunch areas. So the outdoor learning areas is in addition to the shade covers?
Right.
Yeah.
The shade structure are the solar structures, those double. And the
Okay.
outdoor learning areas are, which is part of the questions that she has, are really about, the shade structures are just shade structures. These are, if multiple trustees have continued to ask about outdoor learning spaces, but an outdoor learning space can, as the questions posed, can be anything from, some benches, or they can be true outdoor learning spaces, but that there's a cost that's associated with it. And so what we're trying to do is get clarification about A, is this what you want to do? And B, what are the things that you're sort of thinking outdoor learning spaces should address? And then from there, we can start working with the architects as well as and engaging the community.
Thank you. I think I'd collapsed those 2 items in my head. So, but it's a whole new separate line item. Thank you.
I have a question. We haven't figured out what those outdoor learning spaces would look like, how do we evaluate it? How is it evaluated at $7.9 million and we don't know what they will even be?
Yeah, that's really part of the process right now, because there's such a wide range of what people are thinking of. Like Dr. Rudolph said, it could be a few benches, and that's definitely not going to be $7.9 million for some benches. It could be something more substantial. So that's the piece that we need feedback on, and what communities and schools are looking for.
Right, so one of the things we did is we have sort of a couple of examples of sort of what high-end outdoor learning spaces look like. But in order to execute those, obviously we need to understand what the board's preference is. And if we were to put them in front of you right now, without asking some questions about what we want to try to accomplish, then we would naturally default to that's what it needs to look like, as opposed to, understanding what are the important considerations that we want. If the important considerations that we want just simply fall with, we just need places for kids to sit and be, covered, then that's pretty easy, right? We can, on the cheap, buy benches, as Dr. Westover said, put some shade structures up, and you've accomplished it. But if you expect Wi-Fi to be there, and you want power to be there, and you want shade, and you want fan, like that creates different expectations, and that's what she's trying to get you to.
That makes sense to me. I guess even maybe an additional, maybe it's part of the important considerations, is really the frequency with which we could rely on these. I feel like people really want these, but like there's a situation the last couple of days with the air quality being poor, then there could be like high ozone levels or rain or wind. So there's those types of considerations, I think, when we're looking at a near $8 million expenditure, are these for continuous populations to rely on, and given the situation we're currently in? So are we making a decision for a pandemic, or are we making a long-term investment for our kids that could be periodic in its use? I guess is really what I'm trying to say. So I guess, I'm not sure if that was a question.
Yeah, I think, no, I mean, you bring up a really good point. I think what holds true, though, is when we were doing the MFP, part of the process was listening to the community and listening to the teachers and staff. And outdoor learning spaces did come up, and it was a priority 3 item because at the time it wasn't a safety or health issue. It was a nice to have. So I think there was a request from multiple sites for outdoor learning spaces, with or without the pandemic.
Okay,
I think
thank you.
at $8 million, if, and we don't know what the final cost is, right? This is just a placeholder. What we've done is reallocated funds from cost savings and put it as a placeholder. But if you're going to spend $8 million on outdoor learning spaces, these are permanent structures that can be used for multiple years and that really accommodate various needs. But again, part of that's determined by, do you expect to have Wi-Fi at these outdoor learning spaces, because we're now in a one-to-one environment? If you do, then there's an electrical cost that is associated with porting Wi-Fi over there, right? We can't just put access points and try to string it along. The same thing goes with shade, right? If you're just looking for a place for kids to sit, like the amphitheater we have at both of the middle schools, and you don't really care about shade, then there's a different cost that's associated with that than there is if you expect shade. And you have to remember, like, yes, we can put up a temporary shade structure, but once you start going into the ground, it has to meet DSA codes, and that's where your costs go up. So part of our challenge is, as Dr. Westover said, and Jason K, he can attest to this too. There's so many variations of outdoor learning spaces that you could take on, including, we already have outdoor tables in between most of the schools. So what this is beyond that. And the cost ranges depending on what you're trying to accomplish. And so getting clarity about that is where we are. Now, you can always say, no, outdoor learning spaces should be a priority, and we just won't have.
Are there other questions from trustees? Trustee Conley?
Yeah, I actually wanted to hop back to something that was in the presentation that isn't a part of these questions for trustees, and it was around the perimeter controls that are being implemented now. I'm assuming this means fencing.
Yes.
And when we discussed fencing last year, because what we're looking at is so comprehensive, we talked about there being a design process and having input around what those fences would look like and how they would interact with the neighborhoods around them, especially on sites where there are shared school sites. So we had an interesting time with fencing last year between the Latham Preschool and Mistral and Castro. So I'd like to hear more about what our design process has been for the perimeters, or what it will be for the fencing that's going in.
You know, so this really fell to a safety concern. I think initially our process was to have each school site and each community involved in the process of where the perimeter controls would be. Because we need to get this in order to have students back on campus safely, we felt that we needed to start working on it right away at the end of the school year last year. So like for the feedback, principals were involved. We walked all of the sites. The principals saw multiple drafts and renditions of what the perimeter controls would be, where they would be placed. We also worked with the city because we shared the fields with the city for them to look at what we were thinking. So we involved the principals as well as the city, and then did multiple walks around our campuses. But in terms of community feedback, you're right. That was not part of this process. Part of the perimeter controls, I think when we looked at it this time through, is really just to limit access to our campus and limit access to the students during the school day. I think when we were doing the master's facility plan, there was lots of feedback that ranged from, I want the campuses to be closed, like wanting the school buildings themselves to be closed from the public at all times. And that's not what we've done in this case. For now, the perimeter controls are simply to control adults and people that haven't been screened from entering the campuses and coming into contact with kids.
So are they including the fields?
Yes. So
and they will be locked, the field space will be locked during the day to the public?
Correct. And part of this is because if kids were out doing PE, we wouldn't want somebody that hadn't been screened walking onto the field area. But the intent is that before school and after school, all of the gates would be unlocked and accessible by the public.
I understand the safety considerations around this and why there is urgency around it. And I also don't want to micromanage from the board policy level. I am a little concerned that this didn't come to the board and just started immediately, because it was something that we had actually discussed a process around when we developed the master facilities plan. Even just a heads up that, hey, we are actually kicking this off in June to get ready. I know we had a lot of things going on, but just in the future, I would like to be informed when things on our master facilities plan begin.
Is that the desire of the majority of the board that moving forward before we start a project, we'll bring it in? I think we were under the impression that because you approved the priority list, that we would get the architects in and we would start each project and capitalize on the different items. And because we actually did have extensive input on the fencing, both with Gene and the principals and going through, and we took those back out to the communities. If you want us to do that, we just need to know. We didn't do that for HVACs or anything else either. So I just want to be clear about what the direction is.
So what the Parks and Recreation Department does is they have a work plan that they present each year that shows the different public works projects that are going to be going on within the city for the year. And it lays out the overall timeline or projected timeline, and it does change sometimes. So this slide in here that Dr. Westover presented showing a timeline is something that makes a lot of sense to me, and I expect to see. I'm just surprised that the perimeter process started and there wasn't public input and we didn't know about it.
You know, I think we tried to talk about it in terms of our reopening plan, about all the different things we wanted to put in place to reopen safely, and perimeter controls was on that list.
Yes.
Yeah, we brought it up extensively, and as we were talking about reopening, that we would need to limit access to the buildings, and that we would install, you know, as part of the master facility plan, there were a couple items, the HVAC replacement that we were going to move forward, as well as the fencing to control access to the buildings.
Okay, thank you.
But again, I mean, if you want us to, we have this project, this list right here. Obviously, if the board's desire is for us to bring back, Rebecca just moved the slide.
Oh, sorry.
But if the board's desire is for us to bring back and say, you know, we're about to start a project, or to list here the projects that are sort of going on, actually it is the next slide. We can do that, we just need to know.
And I think another thing to add, built into the schedules you just saw, is in the more detailed schedules, a schematic design presentation. So at schematic design, that would come back to you for approval of budget, schedule, and schematic design. That's down, you know, we're 50% down the road at that point with the design, but you would get another chance to look at it before it ultimately moves forward.
Okay. Yeah, there's not a design process around HVAC, for example. There's a design process around some of these bigger items. And I appreciate the process that is put forward for how outdoor learning structures will be considered. I think that is a good process.
All right, we'll take that and gather the feedback. I think, you know, just because of COVID and the reopening, we view fencing and HVAC as just priority ones that needed to get done in order to address the safety concerns that were sort of present. But what we can do is we'll look at what the bigger items are. Obviously, things like the Lando's new building. I don't know if portable is a big one, but we can at least look around and see which ones are items that we sort of need. Maybe the bathrooms or something that's a consideration, and we can revisit that again. Either we can do it, I can do it individually, or again, if the board is expecting a more formalized process, we can do that too.
I don't think that, I'm not particularly looking for a more formalized process. And I think what's happened is the fact that we're not physically at the school sites. Normally the principals include in all their newsletters, like construction on the library, well, the new library or the new building or the new play structure will begin on such and such time. So I don't want to bog your process down, but that's my opinion. Trustee Blakely, I saw your hand up.
Well, I was just going to say also in the contracts, oftentimes that is what gives me the heads up about where things are. And I don't know that it drilled. I'm trying to remember if we saw fencing in the last couple of board packages, but I think we may have.
Okay.
I just want to point, this fencing is not the same type of fencing we were talking about earlier and that occurred at Mistral. This fencing is increasing the height of fences and closing off gates that already exist. So it's really a replacement of existing ones. So for instance, a good example, over at Graham, you have a 3-foot fence that exists. That fence will be increased and there will be less entry points except, and you know, to sort of section off different areas for during the school day. Over at Stevenson and Therakov, it's the exact same thing. There's already a 9-foot fence that exists, but there are gaps within that fence that allow people to walk onto the field. And during the day, people are using the field. So what we're doing is we're closing those gaps. And there open on the weekends and after hours, but during the school day, they would be closed. And so this is Crittenden, right, over at the on the trail is, again, it's the 3-foot fence. We're going to extend that fence up from 3 feet and move that to either 6 or 9. And that way the trail is now its own path. So I was there this morning, about 7 kids were hopping over the fence. So they won't be able, I mean, if they climb, anybody can climb a fence, but if they climb that fence, so it's not, I guess what I'm trying to say is this fencing isn't the same one that we occurred with Ms. Straw, the preschool, and the other one is really just about we're trying to section off the perimeters and increase the fencing and put gates to limit access in, so we can get access out, but we limit the amount of flow in so that when we have to screen people, they know that they're coming to certain entry points.
Yeah, I mean, these fences, they are going to surround most of the open space in our neighborhoods, basically. And so it does have a neighborhood impact, which is why I think when we had originally talked about them, we had talked about how the city has done fencing, like at Eagle Park, for example, and the community garden. It's something in line with that landscape design language. I know we're trying to throw something up quick and fast. I'm just hoping it's not quick and fast and ugly.
I just quickly went through on the consent agenda of the June 18th meeting. It talks about the campus perimeter controls project and it identifies all the campuses. So I mean, it was on consent, but it was in our package.
Thank you, Trustee Blakely.
I can't see Trustee Wheeler, or let me see if I make this. Oh, Trustee, I'm sorry. You were in a different block of this Hollywood Square. Sorry, Trustee Gutierrez. You're in your own Hollywood.
Yeah, that's what they say, man. You know. Oh, sorry. So thank you, Madam President. So so I'm going to trust the process here like we did last time. There's lots of learning experiences that we learned through the assessment and distribution of priorities and funding that was part of Measure G. As far as I've got 2 questions. As far as I understand the process, and Dr. Rudolph. So the first one is, in terms of the fencing that's going to cover the perimeters of the school, for example, let's look at Castro Mistral. The park area, the green space area, that fencing that's there now, because it's medium height, by what I understand you saying, is not going to change to a little more of an elevated height. And then throughout the course of the day, that area, while we have school in session, will be closed off to the public. However, on the weekends, because a lot of these fields are also used by AYSO soccer, and I'm counting that one day we'll go back to AYSO soccer. During the weekends, then we'll have public accessibility for those same fields. That's the first question. Is that?
Yes.
Okay.
And after school.
And after
Right.
school.
Okay, cool, great, thank you. Because I was going to say practices are a part of that as well. So let's not forget that. So that, having said that, my second question then is, with the process from Measure G to what we're doing now, it's similar, but I just want to reiterate to the community that before a fence is going to be put up around the campus, there's going to be a design process that's involved with that. There's going to be schematics that's going to be involved with that. There'll be intake of community opinion about what that could look like at each campus site. There'll be discussions. We'll get a drawing or drawings, and then eventually they'll be presented to both the community at large and then the Board of Trustees, and then eventually we can decide which one would be in the best interest for the school district at that time. Is that the vision for how you plan to have that proceed again? Or is there going to be a little bit of a difference?
Yeah, so I think Measure T's project list is quite different than Measure G's. Measure G had a lot of classrooms, buildings, and a lot of the projects on the list for Measure T are things like HVAC. And I don't think it would benefit the community very much to have a process on HVAC. But
I'm not asking for that, Rebecca. I'm sorry. Let me clarify. I'm just talking insofar as the perimeter fencing. That's it.
For the perimeter fencing, in this case, we were concerned. So back during the summer, we did not know if we would be opening the doors in August or not. And
Right.
if we were going to be opening the doors in August, one thing that we heard very clearly from the community was they wanted screening before people came on campus, and from the teachers as well. So right now our campuses are very open, and the purpose is just to keep people from coming into the campus. So for the most part, just like Dr. Rudolph said, it's extending and making a fence higher. It's a gate that didn't have a gate across it prior. For example, at Crittenden, it's putting a gate in as opposed to like the little walkthrough. And the whole purpose was that hopefully, if we were able to return to campus, to make sure that we can control people coming in and out. So there was, sorry, back to your original question of like having lots of community input during the summer, just because we weren't sure what was going to happen this year. We felt that the feedback we got from the community was clear that they wanted to have a screening process.
Okay, so let me rephrase the question because I get what you said, and I don't need to. Let's try and work together here. But that's a rehash of what was already said, anyways. So what I'm trying to confirm is just this, and this goes to Devin's point, and I'm trying to clarify that in the past we did have a process like this with Measure G, but my concern, like Devin's now, is, and it's a pretty simple one. When we think about the fencing around the school campus, that also affects the aesthetics of the campus. That doesn't deny the importance of safety for the school. We're not challenging that at all. That's not the point of this. The point is to try and figure out, like Devin said, not to have something ugly put up without consent from anybody. What I want to verify is that at least for the perimeter fencing, we're not going to have something ugly. And there's going to be a way for people to pitch in to just say if they believe it's ugly, could be better, or not adequate. That's all I'm asking for.
It's a chain link fence. You want us to design a chain link fence?
No, what I want is clarification, because I think right now some of the other members of the community may not know that it's a chain link fence, and that's ideal. That's what I want to hear, because if in the end there's members of the community that don't want a chain link fence, I don't want them just busting into the board meeting at that, and saying, "Hey, you never told us it was a chain link fence."
I guess what I would say about Measure G, because we have put fences up since when Measure G was installed. The only thing that parents asked for at all the sites, Stevenson, Castro, Vargas, was where the fences were going. There wasn't a concern about what the fence actually looked like. They were more concerned with the fact that a fence showed up and they were unaware that a fence was going to be there. We've already communicated out, here's where the fences are going to go. The principals had a lot of input. We have maps of sort of where they're going. If this isn't a fence like what is at Theracol, which is this ornate sort of design fence, this is really just a perimeter fencing that, for lack of a better word, is, trying to hide in the background, and it's more about the security protocols. So the ones at the front of the building, so we would match all of those to look similar across the board. So those are those metal ones that have the bars, the ones that run along the property line, some that are covered with brush. There's one that's wooden over at Lando's. All of those would be just regular chain link fences that just denote this is the property line. It isn't about a design feature. This is really just about securing a perimeter.
Well, what about the ones that run along city streets?
Same, it'd be the exact same thing. The one that runs along Montecito is just a chain link fence that goes straight down. The one that runs along Crittenden, again, is a chain link fence. It goes all the way down. The one that is at the front of Vargas is the metal one. The one that's at the front of the metal with the bars. The one that's at the front of Castro, again, is the same. The one that's in front of Mistral. And so each, depending on where the fence is located, determines what it actually looks like or the aesthetics of it. But the ones that typically are running down a street are just, it's a chain link fence because there's a higher cost that's associated with it.
Yeah, I mean, I anticipate we're going to hear from the community about it, because I'm thinking like the street along the park at Bub. I'm thinking about Latham Street, beside Mistral and Castro. These are residential areas where I think, similar to when we heard about Cooper Park, we're going to hear from people about a chain link fence appearing when there has been either nothing at all or like a 3-foot metal designed fence instead.
Trustee Blakely?
This item was on our June 18th agenda, and it was a $73,000 contract awarded to Hibzer Yamauchi for the fencing at a number I haven't counted, Bub, Castro, a bunch of the schools. So if you might want to keep this in mind in terms of the outdoor spaces, and if you want to allocate a significant amount of money to outdoor classrooms, or you want to reserve some perhaps for fancier fences, if you know, you anticipate that might be.
I'd just like to chime in. I feel like since we're now facing so many different real and perceived threats, we've kind of forgotten that this is about school shootings. This is about people coming into classrooms and spaces and potentially onto our campuses and hurting our kids. So I'm kind of more in favor of getting something in there, and I'm trusting the process. That's just my 2 cents. This is not the time for comment. This is the time for questions. And circling back to what we were being questioned on, it wasn't stuff that we've already approved, which is perimeter controls. I think we need to rein in the conversation a bit, maybe open it up to public comment and then get into the comment phase to address the questions that are before the board here about outdoor learning spaces, bumping that up from priority list numbers on the 3rd priority to number 1, as well as the parking cover at Vargas. So I think unless there are additional trustee questions, and I can't see if Ellen has her hand up. Okay. I think we'll open it up at this time to questions, or I'm sorry, for comments from the public. I see the participant list up. If you're on the call, please raise your hand. It's in the lower right-hand corner, the button for you to raise your hand, and we can give you time to speak on this item if you would like to. I don't know if anyone has emailed Dr. Rudolph.
No, there's no one has their hand up.
Okay.
I'm looking at the participant list.
So
right
we'll
now.
move on now to the comment time, which it does say questions, but we can walk through these and comment on the feedback that the district is seeking from trustees at this time. I don't know if you all want to go through in order. Trustee Blakely has her hand up.
Did you want to talk about the order, doing the questions one by one, or the order? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to jump.
I'm happy if you want to just go through all of them at once. I think it just makes it easier.
Okay. Well, if people are getting hit and car windows are being broken, or there's a potential for people to be hit by pine cones and hurt, if a pine cone is large enough to break a window, I think the Vargas parking cover is just, there's barely any question about it. It's a safety thing. I don't want the district to get sued. I think we need to do that one. So I'm all in favor of moving that one to a priority 1 project. As far as the outdoor learning spaces, I had all along in the back of my mind envisioned more like large shade structures. And it sounds like from what Dr. Rudolph said, that is being addressed with the solar installations. So in terms of the most important considerations for outdoor learning spaces, if we had them now, it would be great because of COVID, but it sounds like they wouldn't be built and functional, or at least at all the campuses, for another couple of years. And so I don't know that trying to put outdoor learning spaces sufficient to cover a whole campus because of COVID, but it wouldn't be built for 2 years, concerns me. And I'm concerned about how much of the other space on the campus they might take up, like that could be used for playgrounds or fields or whatever. So I think it's probably, I do believe it's appropriate, and it's nice to have some that would maybe take, you know, like a class, a couple, 2-3 classes. I'd really, however, want to rely on what the principals and the teaching staff want with that. So I'm kind of thinking it's a little premature for me to give a lot of guidance on this. It doesn't make sense to me to do enough for a whole school. And I do believe that they should include shade. I mean, global warming is here to stay. I think we've had our third fall of really bad fires and smoke. And it's, you know, that it's not going to get less sunny in Mountain View. So I think whatever we do build should have some shade, because just like stumps in the, like even in Crittenden, that outdoor amphitheater-y area, it's pretty sunny and hot, and I sunburn. And I imagine, you know, it's not good for all of us to be exposed to too much ultraviolet rays. And I think kids, when they get hot, they'll turn off and they wouldn't be paying attention. But I remember as a kid, sometimes the teacher taking us outside and she would read us a story under the tree, and that was really fun. So something like that. As far as Wi-Fi and power, again, I would really want to defer to the principals and the teaching staff in terms of what they think is appropriate. And I think I already said, as far as how many students should be able to use the space, I think there should be enough for a full classroom of students. And it really comes down to the number of these types of spaces. And I'm not sure what you mean by an extension of the classroom, an outdoor classroom. The outdoor classroom would really replace the whole classroom. And I guess I don't fully understand that question. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Blakely. Trustee Wheeler?
Sure. So I'm glad Trustee Blakely went first, because she expressed a lot of the same comments and concerns that I have. So definitely, yes, move Vargas parking cover to priority 1. I'm not sure what we want to do about learning spaces. I feel the same way that Trustee Blakely was expressing, that it's now that we want the spaces. I don't know about in 2 or 3 years. And I will tell you that my imagination does not cover really expensive things. So I'm always thinking about how to do things inexpensively. So going outside to the picnic tables, you know, for a classroom seems like a really good idea, or going under the existing canopy seems like a really good idea. Taking the chairs from the existing MURs instead of, you know, little wooden stumps or benches seems like a good idea. And I also am concerned, like Trustee Blakely was talking about, taking over existing outdoor space that, you know, kids want to run around on and, you know, play games. So I do agree that we would want covers, but you know, I think there's a lot of covers already. I liked the idea of the portable whiteboards. So, you know, but that's not, you know, an $8 million item. How many students should be able to use this space? I would say, you know, a classroom at a time. So 15 to 30 kids. I don't know how much we're going, you know, it's hard to imagine 2 or 3 years out, are we going to be in the same condition we are now? So, you know, would we need Wi-Fi out there for some outdoor learning, or would the outdoor learning be, you know, like Trustee Blakely was saying, you know, a teacher reading a story, or going out there and working on your classwork, or going out there and, you know, just getting a lesson, you know, and a verbal lesson. So regarding putting outdoor learning spaces to priority 1, I think you know, a modified version of, you know, maybe what you're envisioning would be of interest, but I don't want, you know, real financial hit on our Measure T funds, and I don't want taking up a lot of current outdoor space. So I think when a lot of us were talking about outdoor classrooms, we were talking about a teacher taking their kids outside and having some shade. So I don't see it being an $8 million item.
Trustee Conley.
I was trying to read your lips. I thought it was my name.
I can't get through one of these without forgetting.
No, it's okay. It's been a long day. So I think so first of all, and just for clarification, the original outdoor classroom item that was in our master facilities plan was budgeted at this amount. Is that correct? No. This is a new kind of cost. Okay. Oh, you took away the questions, Rebecca. It's okay. I'll pull them up on my computer so that I can see them real quick and cover them all. All right. So I think we should definitely move the Vargas parking cover up. Clear safety issue. For the rest of these questions, I mean, frankly, I think a lot of what we say tonight is going to shift when we actually hear from teachers and principals about what they need and want. We are not the experts in the field doing this right now. And you know, they're going to have things in mind that they are interested in. So I will give some light opinion here, but I actually anticipate that my opinion will change when I hear from the school sites about what they would prefer. So important considerations for outdoor learning spaces. We're looking at something that's going to be completed by the next school year. So it's 1 year away, correct? For 21. So it's 1 year away. We're still going to be in some sort of condition. Like COVID is not going away in a year, unfortunately. We might have a vaccine by then. How widespread vaccination will be, how successful we are with it. Like there's a lot of uncertainty. That being said, I don't think on any of our sites we have room for every single classroom to be outdoors. And I don't think that's what this item is suggesting. In the things that I have seen in the past are shade structures with some sort of seating, and it could be seating that is modular that can be moved around, like benches that look like rocks that can be moved around but are still comfortable to sit on. And I've seen some with whiteboards or presentation boards. But again, it's going to be up to what the teachers want. But even then, I think those would be some on campus, but not necessarily. It's going to vary by site based on the site itself, where they have space and what the capacity would be. I think at a minimum, an outdoor classroom space needs to have enough room for a class of students to go to. But other than that, I think we really need to hear from teachers and principals about, do they want an extension of the classroom or a separate outdoor classroom? What they think should be included. I think shade is a minimum, but beyond that, what do they think should be included? And, you know, I just said, I think it should be a class, but if they come back and say, no, just half a class, then that will be helpful input.
Trustee Gutierrez? Sorry, I was taking notes.
Yeah, no worries. It's all good. I like that we can agree to disagree with both between ourselves and also with the DO. It's a very respectful and courteous conversation. And that just proves to the effectiveness of the team. And that's a plus. So I look at this as a strength, not a weakness. Having said that, I agree with everything that the trustees before me have said. And I think we need to get feedback from school sites. That's key, because I'm not an expert matter, or I'm not the expert in terms of what's required for teaching and what the teachers are looking for and how best they can be effective with their pedagogy of instruction, right? So I'd rather get feedback from them on how they look at it, how they would like to use it, and that will determine a lot in terms of whether or not I can support this type of change. because it's also pending space, right? And then intent and up to a point, the end goal. So I hope that gives you some idea of where I stand. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Gutierrez. I'm unmuted. Okay. So I concur with the majority for outdoor cover over the parking at Vargas. I've seen those pine cones. It's not a regular one. They're one of those dense ones that aren't open. You can hear them when they fall, even in my house when they fall out on the street. So it's no joke. I think it's a good idea. I do have a couple thoughts on the outdoor learning spaces. I think if we're looking at something for $8 million, we need to have a 10 to 20 year lens when we're looking at it. I know we are in COVID-19, and I know it's really hard to think both within that scope and beyond it. But if, I would definitely say for at least a classroom, but the hardest thing about saying that is if it's 30 kids in a classroom on a small site like Vargas, for example, and they're 6 feet apart, how on earth do you do that? That I don't know what this, for square footage, for social distancing, it seems very complex. So I'd rather not try to view it through that lens. I'll just say that. I think that it's very challenging that because we have sites with very different space available, and that this could be a huge equity piece where Bub and Huff and Landals have a lot of real estate to do something like this, and Stevenson, Mistral, Castro, and Vargas do not. There's just not a lot of space there to play with for this. Most of our elementary sites, from what I'm aware of, do have living classroom spaces and even our new sites. So that to me is some outdoor learning spaces. So I'm actually, the more I've thought about it, after listening to all the great feedback from everyone, is it's the middle schools where the kids don't get outside that much. And that's where I'd like to see how this would be fleshed out. And that ties back into the COVID situation, where when we even looked at the hybrid model, where they're much more social, much more interactive in passing. So having something that could work for the middle schools, I think would be great. And I know there's already amphitheater seatings, I believe at both, that's outdoor. Yeah. So maybe something could be modified from that, but they don't get outside that much. And as a result, I'll segue that comment into Wi-Fi and power. I am adamantly opposed to that unless it's lights. And they could be solar as well. I think most children, especially in a one-to-one environment, and given all the emails we've gotten on screen time, don't need any additional plugging in when they're in an outside learning environment. That just doesn't, those two pieces don't fit well together in my mind. And yeah, again, circling back to the equity piece, I mean, some sites can handle this and some can't. So I think that should be part of the conversation. I'm not opposed to outdoor learning environments, but I do think the lens needs to be a 10 to 20 year one. And where could we do it in an equitable manner? And since we have 2 middle schools and every student goes through those, that's kind of where my first past thoughts were gravitating towards. So
I just want to point out just one thing, because I know everybody keeps harping on the price. So if you look at the master's facility plan, just for Huff alone, the projected cost of the project was $3.4 million. So for one school, it's 3.4. If you're thinking about this is across multiple schools, these are not extensive, wide, large swaths of areas. This is creating space for kids to go outside in the event that we need to utilize outdoor spaces. And so if you add up the total cost of priority 3 for outdoor learning spaces, you will see that what was originally adopted in the master's facility plan far exceeds the $8 million that we were able to scrape together to address this as an issue. I just want to put that in context, because we didn't do our due diligence to bring the total cost to you. And so that's a piece of feedback. But in terms of just the total amount, and I have it up right now, I could probably look at for what each school costs. but I would assume that when we worked with the sites, it included all that. And this includes hardscapes, softscapes, furnishing, seat walls, shade features, electrical data connections, right, across the board. So that was, and again, I just happened to stumble on what Huff's looks like, not what everybody else's looks like.
So so it sounds like we're talking about trying to move up a small piece, but we can only afford a small piece of what had already been planned. Does that make sense? Is that what this means, or?
Yes, correct. So if you, again, I'm just looking at, so Ms. Straw's outdoor learning space is $3 million.
Yeah.
So what you're essentially, what we're trying to do is to create just a place that is conducive for teachers to take their kids out to learn. These aren't expansive areas. These are just, how do we facilitate if a teacher wants to go outside and there are different elements, whether it's the sun or whether it is, it's windy or something else. How do we facilitate that outdoor learning, knowing that, there's, especially with everything taking place, that we want to get kids in and out of the classroom to sort of give them a breather. And so this is really on the dime here. This isn't the full scope of what the project is.
Would it be possible that whatever we do can be phased into that larger project later on? Like if we pick a site, but we do the shade now and maybe some of the seating, but we don't do all the other, right? Like that it's in a phased manner so that when we get to those projects in priority 3, we don't have to like tear something down.
Yeah, correct. So I think part of the questioning is, if the goal is to get a group of kids out there, then you have to take into a couple considerations. And so, you can get seating and shade, and that's about as far as you get with $8 million. And then you come back or maybe you seating, shade, and you want to put some lighting out there just for safety purposes. And so you want to run the electrical. We're doing the same thing with our solar. We know that we want to put cameras up at some point. Well, part of, for the solar projects is installing, electrical outlets onto the shade structures, so that when we get to that point, we can maximize it. So all we're doing is we're trying to start the project and create some type of outdoor spaces in addition to the benches that we have out there. And we know that there are certain schools, Vargas, Castro, and Stevenson, that don't have that access because of the way their buildings are configured. So This is just a simple, let's get these projects sort of going. And then as we design it out and sort of understand what people are looking for, we could then phase it in and say, well, we could only do $8 million worth, and that got us this, but if we get another chance, we'll build onto it. And these would not replace, we're not talking about ripping up all the grass and putting 20 of these out there. You're really talking about 1 to 2 or 3 learning spaces that could be utilized during different parts of the day by different teachers, so that they can go. There's no way that we can accommodate everyone with them. And I don't even think that was the original intent of the master's facility plan.
Yeah, I think that the trick here will be, when you're doing this, is to let the public know this is not so we can bring kids back on campus socially distanced in any mass volume. And I really think that it'll be a tricky communication piece. I think it's worth having at all sites. I just do know from having been at 2 sites, one of the largest and now one of the smallest, that some of the larger ones already have overhangs on areas with picnic tables. And so I don't know if we could prioritize areas that don't have any shaded learning environments, but just a comment, not a requirement. Trustee Gutierrez, I saw your hand up. Or did I not? Maybe that was Ellen. She's right below you on my screen. Ellen.
Yeah.
Yes.
So one of the biggest part of the first bullet was, are you good with putting outdoor learning spaces from moving it from category 3 to category 1. So I would say yes to moving it, from 3 to 1. And it would really help, and I see Jason here, it would really help to get some professional help here about what we're talking about. So, we're all throwing out ideas here. So if you talk about 1, 2, or 3 outdoor learning spaces at the schools, what do these look like? So, maybe you could use part of that money to do some, 1 or 2 preliminary sketches of, by professional architects.
So that's actually part of the process, which is why we're asking you to move it up to priority 1. We wouldn't send this out to architects and we wouldn't start engaging the public at its current state of priority 3. But once, if the board decides to move it up to priority 1 for an $8 million cost, then we can bid it out to multiple architects, gather feedback, come back with a couple different options and designs and say, here's what this looks like, and then hear back from the board. But based off of the process that we've used now, we won't start any process if it's not already approved on the priority list. And since you only approved priority 1, we are not, and this is part of our learnings from Measure G, we're not in the position to go out and say, well, let's do outdoor learning spaces and bid all these things out. It's the same reason why it'd be easy to put out, say, well, we need to put the pine cones and stop that issue coming. But if we use Measure T funds, we actually need board approval because the board was very specific about the process. So we do plan on bringing it back to you.
And to get into a little specifics with what's in that $8 million number, as Dr. Rudolph mentioned a moment ago, it's 2 to 4 of these 30-person outdoor learning areas is what we figured we could fit on the elementary school sites. Obviously some can fit 2, some can fit 4. You can fit more than that on your middle schools. Obviously, we figured anywhere from 8 to 12 with the space available without taking too much blacktop or field area. And it's benches, whether they be metal or precast concrete. It's floor finish because you've got to replace the floor surface to get an ADA compliant area for the children to get to. And it's shade sails. And it's also, to the point of building for the future, it includes underground conduit for electrical data, whatever you may want to add in the future. And as Rebecca said, you can go anywhere between that and picnic tables that the kids could sit on. So you engage the services of a landscape architect to kind of help you through that design, meet with the stakeholders, the sites, the principals, and refine that design before we bring it back to you guys at schematic design level.
Thank you, Mr. Cave. Are there other trustee questions or comments on this? Trustee Blakely?
I hadn't focused on the priority 3 projects very hard when we approved the master facilities plan a year ago or at the beginning of this year. And now I'm flipping through as we're talking and I see it's a multi-million-dollar item on each school, for each school, as you just suggested, Dr. Rudolph. So I'm a little confused as to how $8 million would get us like very far. And how, if we moved it up to priority 1, that's not going to cover all the schools, at least what it was costed out at. And I know, Rebecca, you said that that the cost may be a little bit less now because the construction environment is a little different than it was when we roughly blocked out the facilities plan. But I'm just a little confused at this point as to what we would be getting for the $8 million.
Yeah, right now. Oh, sorry, Dr. Rudolph, did you want to?
I was just going to say part of the reason why we're bringing this up on the dime is because multiple trustees have on more than one occasion brought up the need for outdoor learning spaces. And so this is just our response to trustees to say, if you want outdoor learning spaces, you know, this is the best that we can do considering the constraints that we have.
And I think that the dollar amount is also a placeholder right now because we don't have enough information from the schools and the teachers on what it is that they need. You know, anything similar to the trustees, you know, varying opinions, needing to hear what the teachers have to say. So this is really giving us the ability to add it to our project list so we can further explore it. And it's more of a placeholder. In the master's facility plan, I think when we were looking at it, Jean was looking at if we could shoot for the moon, what would we want? You know, and like Measure G, as we went through the process, there are some things that we discovered that we don't have the ability to do. So some of the things were scaled back. You know, so this is really a placeholder until we can gather more feedback.
Trustee Wheeler?
Yeah, so I don't want to shoot for the moon. And I am one of the trustees who asked about outdoor learning spaces. And my thought was for this year as a way for students to come back to school. So that's part of the complication here of wanting kids to come back to school, and the understanding that what we hear from professionals is that it's safer outside or with lots of ventilation versus as Trustee Conley was talking about, you know, a 20-year plan. So, I'll go back to what I said. I'm interested in getting some professional designs, moving outdoor learning spaces from 3 to 1, and then seeing where we are and not shooting for the moon.
Okay, so I think if I'm hearing, oh, sorry, Trustee Blakely?
Thank you. I'm sorry, I keep coming back with more. Just flipping through the facilities plan now, I'm reminded of those outdoor seating area, the covered outdoor seating that was at Stevenson before it got its permanent campus, that was outside of the old temporary district office and is where the preschool. What would something like that, setting up a bunch of picnic tables and just putting those little kind of tents? Because my understanding is, at least if we're looking at COVID world, there can't be more than one wall. So we couldn't really do tents, but in those covered areas theoretically could do something. And how much would that cost? I mean, that might be a cost efficient solution that could be popped into each school and they already have picnic tables.
The initial cost would obviously be quite low for those pop-up tents. You run into a few issues with those. They can become a maintenance problem because the fabric does need to be replaced every year or so if it's out in the sun and wind, whereas what would be figured in the outdoor seating area that's priced here is more of a permanent shade sail. It's more obviously on a much smaller scale, but similar to what you have over at Bub now. So it's something you replace every 12 to 15 years as opposed to annually. With the pop-up tents. So that's one thing that was considered here. The other thing that would need to be considered is Division of State Architect does not approve those pop-up tents. So if you had them at your site and you had a future project coming down the pipeline, you would most likely have to take them out. So with the Measure T in front of you, it wouldn't make sense to put those in right up front because in all likelihood, DSA would require them to come out if you have another project at that site.
Okay, thank you.
So it looks like, I believe you have fairly clear direction, Dr. Rudolph, on the parking cover over Vargas, some outdoor learning space, important considerations. The dominant thing I'm hearing is that we'd like to hear from the sites and staff what's best for their students and what they need and how this might look. Shade overwhelmingly. I didn't hear an overwhelming or 3 people talk about Wi-Fi. Maybe I missed something.
So just this is only approval to get into the design phase. That's all we're asking. We're just simply asking to move this up into a priority 1. And we were asking just for your considerations. We'll come back with after we get feedback. If the
Sure.
board approves it into priority one, we'll come back with examples, feedback, what teachers say they need. So you don't have to worry about the specifics of it.
I was just going through the questions for trustees and seeing where
Yeah.
we all agree. Okay,
Yeah.
so I think everyone agrees to move it to priority one. I didn't hear anyone say don't. The important considerations, I've already covered that. I think shade, possibly power for lights, no Wi-Fi. And I don't think any of us want to prescribe the students or the last bullet point. So did I miss anything, trustees?
That's good.
Okay, thank you.
I just have one more
So-
question. On the Wi-Fi piece, when I was looking at the facilities plan, most of the suggested areas were in between wings. So the Wi-Fi would already reach there, wouldn't it? Like between two wings? I'm just wondering why that would be separate.
Our access points aren't really designed to address a one-to-one learning environment. So one of the consequences of going to one-to-one, if you want places where kids are going to learn outdoors, you now have every kid who's on it. And so you need to boost the signal. It's just not capable of commanding that. They don't reach that far.
Okay. I think I'm with Trustee Wilson in any event. If they're going to be outside, it should be for purposes other than laptops.
Do you have everything you need from us?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Westover.
And Board President Wilson, can I request a break now?
Sure, let's take a 5-minute break and come back at 8:07, please.
Okay.
Okay, we have all 5 trustees back. We're going to move on now once Dr. Rudolph returns to the topic on equity.
All right, so I want to introduce Megan Hefferman, who is our equity coach and who will be leading the presentation.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be speaking with you today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so I can get the presentation pulled up. All right. And then just a confirmation that you can see the presentation once I get it loaded would be very helpful. You should see the presentation now on your screen.
Yes.
Fantastic. Great. Okay. Can everybody hear me okay? Awesome. Great. So again, my name is Megan Henderson. I'm the new equity coach for the district. I'm really excited to be here. Before I dive into the presentation today, I did want to just take a moment to acknowledge that 2 days ago, August 18th, marks the 100-year anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment, aimed at giving women the right to vote. So a monumental step towards equity in the United States. Well, it's important to commemorate, of course, that historic moment. It's also important to acknowledge that while many women were finally granted enfranchisement, millions of others, both men and women, specifically Black men and women, were denied that right even decades after the passage of that amendment. Even now, voter suppression policies disproportionately affect people of color. And this is just a strong reminder that equity work is more important now than ever. And also a reminder that meaningful change takes time and a great deal of perseverance. And so I just wanted to start with that and thank you for engaging in this work today. All right. And so I also first want to acknowledge, I'm sorry, Trustee Blakely, did you want to comment? Oh, okay. I first want to acknowledge that there has already been a call to action at the district level, and that is the board goals and resolutions. I really appreciate the broadness of this goal because it gives us a lot of opportunity. And it mentions some of the fundamental things that I think that this district wants to engage in. And that is specifically goal 3, the inclusive and supportive culture. So of course, our goal statement is that every student, staff, family, and community member will feel valued and supported while working, learning, and partnering with Mountain View Westman School District. The strategy behind that goal will be to build engaging and positive interactions among students, staff, and the community, ensuring that everybody will feel welcomed and included in this educational process. And again, it was broad enough to really encompass a lot of different things, but specific enough to give us direction. So this is really going to help us moving forward, this goal. And I also want to acknowledge that the resolutions that have been passed are really important because they help send messages to our whole community about what we value as a district. And those resolutions are affirming the district's support of its students and families regarding immigration enforcement actions at the school, denouncing racism, supporting equity, safety, and well-being of Black people, condemning hate crimes, and the resolution finally in support of digital access and inclusion, which has been put in action already by the district. So I really appreciate those resolutions because again, I think it sends a message about what we value as a district. And ultimately, these values we're going to take to create goals, and those goals will create outcomes. So again, I just want to say thank you again for those resolutions. I did say, of course, in kind of my opening statements, something to the effect that equity work is not a sprint, it's a marathon, and one that's obviously a very noble undertaking. What I want to highlight, however, is kind of what stage we're in currently. And I think we're definitely trying to understand the problem the best we can. And we also want to understand it in terms of looking at data and looking at feedback from staff and community members. So the first kind of part of this presentation is I'm going to try to help you understand the problem based on the data, so the picture that the data shows. The staff at Mountain View Westman School District were sent a survey and asked to complete it. It was from a company called Equimetrics. You may or may not be familiar with it. And this was given again to all teachers and all staff. And they were asked specific questions about equity, diversity, and inclusion. This is going to help kind of craft our demonstrated need statement. So again, what does our community look like? You know, and that's going to help us with our goals. So the Equimetrics data review had a lot of different items on it. So they measured the institution's response surrounding the following topics. Diversity was one, and they defined it as the presence of individuals of varying backgrounds and or experiences. Equity, fair, transparent treatment of all. Inclusion, meaning an environment in which all individuals are treated fairly and respectfully. Cultural competency, which is the ability to understand, effectively interact with people across varying cultures. Communication, of course, effective sharing of information. Leadership, leaders are taking ownership and are supportive. It asks staff and teachers about mission, vision, and values of the organization. Support modification and enhancement of an organization's mission, vision, and values. Alignment, meaning policies, communication, and actions are all connected, and policy and practice. So the components reflected in organizational policies and practices. What I do want to highlight about this survey, and after speaking with the creators of this survey, is that this survey really helped us get a view of the staff and teachers' perceptions of these items. At this point, it wasn't trying to measure outcomes, but perception. So what do our staff and teachers know about these issues? And what is their perceived alignment to these issues in terms of their district goals, what they're asked to do in the classroom? The scores were ultimately reported in this way. There were item scores, so you can see the different kinds of questions they were asked. So in my work group, we have varying backgrounds and or experiences among team members. I'm looking at the first item on the presentation. That was under the diversity subcategory. And as you can see here, the results were reported in strongly agree, neutral, disagree, and then there was an average. So as you can see here, staff and teachers were asked to either strongly agree, neutral, or disagree with those statements. After looking at a lot of the data, there were a couple things that popped out, which is what we're going to be talking about today. But I also wanted to mention too, that the neutral category, while it doesn't give us information about whether people agree or disagree with those statements, does give us information on its own. And we can surmise that neutrality was either a lack of understanding of the specific question or just not being sure how they felt. Let me go ahead and whoop. All right, so after looking at all of the data, I wanted to highlight 4 big areas of need. The diversity scores for the Equimetrics data really told us that almost half of the participants, so the highest indicator of the 4, felt that Mountain View Westman was very diverse, had a diverse staff with varied experience. They were less likely to agree, however, that diversity initiatives were prioritized by the district. For equity, less than half of all participants agreed that underrepresented populations lacked full access to resources and support of the district, though the lack of participation by underrepresented groups was most concerning to participants. In the inclusion category, almost half of participants, the highest indicator of the 3, felt that Mountain View Westman included them, regardless of their background, but they were less likely to agree that their ideas or suggestions were solicited. And as far as cultural competency, nearly half of all participants reported that they felt supported by their district, regardless of their cultural background. and nearly half our participants also felt able to communicate with and understand people from diverse backgrounds. Again, I do want to note that there were high levels of neutrality on the results at large. And so that can, again, I want to surmise that could be one of two things, either that there was a lack of understanding of the certain terms or that they just weren't really sure how they felt about it. So they provided us, the team in Equimetrics provided us with their key observations and opportunities. So generally feeling like the workplace is diverse was a strength, and feeling included regardless of your cultural background was also a strength. And the organization actively promoting diversity was also listed as a strength for our district. The opportunities they listed were, of course, broader communication of those diversity, equity, and inclusion, and cultural competency initiatives. So they're saying that that could be enhanced both at the organization and work group level. And that can also kind of support my thesis around the high levels of neutrality. Addressing and identifying reasons for disparities in response with locations and departments, and then improving proportional representation in all activities, looking outside for better ways to support DE&I initiatives. And again, that's diversity, equity, and inclusion into the community and community resources. And of course, policies and practices that support the value of individual differences. You can see all 9 of those categories that were listed out of the data. Those were the strengths and opportunities that they provided. So that was the Equimetrics survey. We wanted to go a little further, and we actually adapted the New England Higher Education Survey to fit our needs. And this was the internal staff survey data at the district office level. So after an extensive search, we adapted the New England Resource Center for Higher Education to talk about the institutionalization of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We had to adapt it, of course, because it was built for higher education, though we felt that the survey was going to provide some really great data for us. And so I wanted to go through the way that the results were listed so that you understand on the next few slides. So stage 1, of course, would be emerging. At this stage, they're beginning to recognize diversity, inclusion, and equity as a priority, and starting to build campus-wide constituency for the effort. Stage 2 is developing campus. At this stage, a campus is focused on ensuring the development of institutional and individual capacity to sustain the diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. And of course, stage 3 is transforming. So at this stage, a campus has fully institutionalized their diversity, inclusion, and equity into the fabric of the institution. It's almost embedded in everything that they do, from the strategic plan to the school site plans. That would be our goal, right? Is to get to stage 3. Just like the Equimetrics survey, there were quite a few different subcategories. Philosophy and mission was 1. The average score was a 1.3. So if it's on a stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3 kind of grading system, that 1.3 would be an average of all the respondents' scores. So if one respondent said that we're at stage 1 and another respondent said we were at stage 3 for any one of the subtopics, obviously the average would be 2, and that's how it was reported. I wanted to give you an average so that you could get a sense of the data as a whole, but know that that's not how typically it's reported, but I added that as a feature just so we could get a sense for what the priorities were. So for philosophy and mission, and alignment to philosophy and mission for diversity, equity, and inclusion, the people who took the survey averaged us as a 1.3, so in between a 1 and a 2. And the steps forward could or could not include things like developing and disseminating common definitions, aligning our mission and vision to equity standards to accommodate for equity goals, incorporating equity goals into the strategic plan. So I think those are just some really natural next steps. And we'll go over lots of next steps and things like that, things that will be brought to board approval a little later on. Teacher engagement was another subtopic, and this is a 1.2. I think the average score also kind of lets you see how the subtopics compare to one another? So this is a little below the philosophy and mission alignment, but not too far below. So things like professional development resources, creating opportunities for teacher feedback and targeted support regarding, again, diversity, equity, and inclusion, isolating and modifying new teacher onboarding procedures to reflect our equity goals. These are possible steps forward. Research and metrics, so school climate surveys, teacher input, disaggregated student data. How aligned are our district priorities with diversity, equity, inclusion? So again, that's what I was trying to really get at. That was 1.2, and the natural steps forward could include school climate surveys based on a common language. And again, that common language piece will come up a little later in my presentation too, because it's going to be really important. Codifying teacher and community input to help create clear goals, and enabling teachers and administrators to disaggregate student data, to look at data not as a whole of whether or not we're above standard, below standard, you know, or approaching standard, but you know, what populations of our students are succeeding and which are struggling, and disaggregating the data so that we can see the true dimensions of disadvantage that we have. Again, empowering teachers to be able to do the same. Community engagement, 1.6. I believe this is actually the highest rated subtopic on the category, or sorry, on the survey. Logical steps forward could include planning for and implementing Title IX and Title VI report training, supporting non-academic programming related to equity and inclusion, including not limited to after-school programs, soliciting and managing community and staff input related to equity goals. So again, input is really going to be key. Student involvement was a subcategory. At 1.2, it includes students in both the framing and initiation of equity goals. Sorry, my cat. Creating and implementing equity and diversity activities. Another logical step forward could be incorporating equity and diversity goals into profile of a graduate, an opportunity that could be a possibility. And then leadership was a 1.4, hiring and empowering diversity-focused staff members could be a logical step forward, isolating and modifying relevant policy changes, coordinating efforts between, of course, the Board of Trustees, administrators, and cabinet members as well. And so those were the dimensions of that particular NERSHA survey. And again, the rating system was a 1, 2, and a 3. And if you have any questions, of course, about that, we can talk about the survey results in particular and the metrics a little bit later on. One thing I really did want to highlight was the socio-political context for equity. Because after all, we are educating our students so that they can be active participants in the world they're going to inherit. So looking at equity topics and getting your feedback, I would also really like you to keep in mind the socio-political context, including things like police violence and the deaths of Black Americans, the visibility and awareness of the Black Lives Matter movement. And a lot of these are already apparent in the resolutions that you have passed, but also really good to keep in mind. Things like the coronavirus, the exacerbation of poverty and inequity that we can't even really understand the fallout from even now. So as we really create our goals and then our strategies to achieve outcomes, it'll be important to keep all of this in mind. The upcoming election cycle, divisive political forces, all of these things affect our students and affect our daily lives. You know, whether or not we talk about it with our children. LGBTQ visibility, gender nonconformity, gay marriage, trans rights. All of these things are a part of who we are in the fabric of our society. And I just want to remind you too that children, and I'm sure you know this, but children are aware of all of these things, right? Whether they have the language to speak to them or not. And so we really, when we're creating our goals, we have to really be mindful that our children are people and live in and function within a sociopolitical context, whether they have the language to talk about it or not. And again, looking toward the future to a world they will inherit. Excuse me. And then finally, of course, gender disparities and sexual violence. So the pay gap, political representation for women, the Me Too movement, all of these things that are really ubiquitous if you turn on the news or if you look at any media outlets, things that some students are engaged in even now. So that's the socio-political context piece that I hope that you'll keep in mind as I ask for your feedback a little bit later on. I really want to highlight, and this is from our econometrics survey. And again, these survey results are available, to anybody who wishes to see them. One of the ways the data was aggregated here was at the school site level. So if you look down at the bottom on the x-axis, you can see all the different school sites. And then of course the score is on the y-axis. And so you can clearly see how the schools are being compared. This is the overall econometric score. So this has taken into account all 9 dimensions that I had previously talked about. And it highlights a few things, some of which I want to mention. I kind of want to hedge my comment by saying that I am well aware that correlation does not equal causation. So we can look at all of this data and we can make assumptions about what we think is happening. We can't make assumptions and be 100% sure. However, we need to look at the data objectively and reason. And so I think that what this data is helping us do is look at associations among specifically choice schools. If you look at Stevenson and Mistral, they have some of the lowest scores. And again, this is not a performance score. This is a perception score. So this is how the staff and teachers at this particular site feel about the alignment of diversity, equity, and inclusion goals and the district. So, and they're a little out of alignment, as you can see. They're some of the lowest schools. And so I think that that's something to consider as we look towards future board meetings and overall goals, is that there's obviously here a correlation between some of our choice schools and then the perception of equity at those specific school sites. Now, on the other end, I do want to say that Vargas Elementary, who's of course named after an undocumented immigrant, has one of the highest scores, and that actually remained throughout. Again, this is an average, but if you look at the subcategories specifically, it remained virtually the same. There was some shifting around near the middle, but mostly the polarities stayed the same. So I want to mention that, and I also want to underscore that the decisions that you make as a board reflect in the data. And so your decisions are really important, especially in the next year, as we start to build goals, and strategies. This is just a really pivotal time. And I can't really say enough how important your feedback will be and your guidance. And so that's why I wanted to point out that particular thing. Instead of trying, this is a great quote from Ben Hecht, the Harvard Business Review. I feel like he said it best and I couldn't say it better. So I included that in this presentation. Instead of trying to change some people to fit the organization, we must actually focus on transforming our organization to fit all people. And hopefully that thought and that idea will carry you through, and you can keep that in mind, because I don't think I'd be lying if I said that wasn't important, considering all of the resolutions and goals that you've already passed. All right. So building an approach. When I accepted the position, a lot of people were filling positions that were previously vacant. There was a lot of this going around, a lot of, oh, I have big shoes to fill. And my response, of course, jokingly was, well, we've got big shoes to cobble because we've got to build the approach. And so I'm really relying on your guidance today, and of course the future board meetings, to help us build a program that I hope will really be around for a long time, and one that will grow from, a little seedling to something that prospers in the future. So of course, and it's a very important step to be here at the beginning. So understanding the problem is something we did by objectively looking at the data. So now it's really time to set our priorities. And so that's what I need your help with. So I'm seeking board direction for future meetings on a few items, and we'll start here. And of course, I'd love to get your feedback here in just a minute. But some of the items that that I'm seeking your kind of priorities on are developing a common language for terms such as equity, cultural competency, anti-bias. There's a lot of terms out there. So I think it's important that we have a common language, that our community, our teachers, staff, the board and cabinet leadership can all talk about these issues with a general understanding of what we mean when we say such words. Building a timeline, of course, based on board priorities. Building a structure and common practice to engage multiple stakeholder groups, and strategies and ways to measure, I think there's a word missing, but to measure all of these things, right? To ensure that when action was taken, it was taken in the right way. And then of course, so that we can go back and we can adjust things that aren't turning out how we thought that they would be. Before I ask for your feedback, I do want to give you a little update on things that are already in the works based on the board goals and the resolutions. And that is one of them was to hire an equity coach. That was already completed. Developing a full implementation plan of action with measurables and deliverables. I would love to get that to you by October. It's in development. Of course, in order to create that and start to organize that, I would love to hear from you about your priorities. That plan will eventually be embedded into the strategic plan for 2026. Again, that's speaking more to the institutionalization of equity goals and how they seep into all of the work that we do for all students. Continuing to make decisive actions around inclusiveness and equity is ongoing, underscoring that our actions have an impact. Again, Vargas having the highest staff rating around equity, celebrating the work that they do, and also hoping to replicate it. Teacher, staff, and leadership training is scheduled. Creating a Mountain View Westman equity report card is also something that's in the works. So it's ongoing, but it's scheduled to be completed this fall. And that equity report card will help measure not only perception, but outcomes at the school site level, and would also help looking at curriculum. So how could we score whether a curriculum meets our equity standards or not? It's going to be something that we're going to need to develop. There's a lot of really great examples out there. It's going to be doing a lot of research and finding what works best for our district, especially given board feedback. And then the last thing too that's in development that's not new to anyone on the board or the community is the Stevenson enrollment practices brought up by the SAHF, the Attendance Areas Task Force. So that's also something that's going on this year that's in development. And also something I might have left off, of course, is the Huff renaming. So that's also something that's going to be something I'll be involved with, but it's also an ongoing project that will be happening this year. So lots of stuff, lots of things that we're going to need your feedback on. So with that, I've got two questions that I would love your feedback on, and that is using equity as your filter. It's almost like putting on a pair of equity glasses. Are there other areas of our organization that you would like for us to investigate? So of course we did the equimetric survey and the NERSHA results, but I want to know if there's any other data or feedback you think would be appropriate in terms of looking at our organization. And of course, understanding the problem is really paramount in terms of moving forward. So that's one of the questions I have. And then the other is, given the information that you've already received, the recent state, of course, of our educational climate, what would you, the board, like to prioritize regarding our equity work? I've thrown a lot of information at you and a lot of possibilities. And so I want to know what your priorities are so I can make them my priorities and then get some goals and deliverables to you in the next few board meetings. So with that, I would open it up to your feedback.
Thank you, Ms. Henderson. We will start off with questions from board members. See, Trustee Blakely.
I just had one kind of clarifying question. Thank you for the presentation.
You're very
On
welcome.
the critical decisions equimetrics data review comparison report that had the red circles, page 22.
I can go back.
There's a little grid there, the grid at the right where it lists the location and then the score. What's that column on the right? That I was confused about what that was.
Number of
Sure.
people.
The column on the right is N, and that's number of people who participated in the survey.
Okay. Thank you. That was just my clarifying question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are there other questions from trustees? I'm sure everyone has comments. Would you mind, Megan, scrolling back to the last slide?
Not a problem.
You framed something as a question, but I think it's more of a comment. Maybe you'd essentially asked, are there areas that may not have been covered that the board is interested in? I think that might be more of a comment than a question.
I see. Yes. No, you're absolutely right.
I was thinking of it as this is the appropriate time, but it's not. Other questions from trustees? Trustee Blakely?
Just in terms of clarifying questions on the groups that took the survey, we've got district office. Did we have any like certificated staff, like the food service people, or the what do you call it? The
MVES?
MOT.
Yes, so
MOT.
they were captured. There's another area that says other categories. So if they took the assessment, they're listed. It's just not on here.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Dr. Riddle.
Just to clarify, when was the equimetrics survey administered?
It was administered in the spring of 2019.
Okay.
Right around March,
2019.
April.
A year and a half ago.
Recent. Oh no, I'm sorry, 2020.
Would it have been before we closed?
Yes, it was right before we closed.
Okay, thank you. Are there additional clarifying questions from the board?
I would just love to see the survey, the overall surveys, and the results. That would be great.
Absolutely, we can definitely send that.
Thank you.
I'll piggyback on that, and it would be interesting to see like who are the respondents. I mean, clearly with like lower population numbers, you're not sure if that's mostly,
It's not going to, in order to hide the identities of the employees, it doesn't show who the respondents are. It just shows the total number in order to keep it anonymous.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't mean their names. I just meant like, is it staff? Is it parents?
Right,
Is it not who they are?
It's not parents. It's just staff and teachers.
Okay, thank you. I just think it helps because if certain groups are like everything's great, then it changes your.
Sure.
But if
it would give us more
very evident it's one department or two or four, then it's you really know where to align your
just
efforts.
Looking at that grid, it looks like there was pretty good participation though. I mean, like Vargas Elementary, 22 participated. Just looking at those numbers, it's a significant portion of the people. Like Crittenden had 56, Castor 33. I mean, it looks like most people.
We had, I think it was close to 90% of all employees actually respond to the equity survey.
Oh, that's great.
And we continue to actually work with this organization to develop tools. So it wasn't kind of a one and done thing. We continue to work with them, and I've already met them and spoke with the team.
Was there any question about discipline in any of the questions here for student discipline?
Not to my knowledge.
Thank you. Trustee Gutierrez?
Thank you. So I have a question. Are we also planning to ask our students, especially in the middle schools, how they look at these issues?
I can't speak to what our goals are going to be because I'm obviously soliciting your feedback right now. But if student involvement is something that you'd like to prioritize, I think it would be a wonderful thing to get students involved in this process, to not only make sure that they're aligned, with all of these things, but that there's also buy-in, so that these become a priority for every community member, not just adult community member.
Right.
Are there other clarifying questions from trustees? Let me scroll back up here. I'm not seeing hands. Okay. Are there members of the public, either on the Zoom call? If you'd like to comment on this item, please click on the lower right-hand corner of your screen in the participants panel on the item called Raise Hand, and we will take your comments.
There's no one there.
Okay, then we'll move on to trustee comments. Trustee Conley?
Yes, would it be all right if we stop screen sharing now?
Of course.
Thank you. So I think as we enter this work, I'm really excited we're doing this work. I appreciate the presentation, Ms. Henderson, and the, starting to base our work on data. I think there's an ambitious work plan here as well. I think we have to consider our role. So who holds the power here? And are they representative of our broader student and parent community? And we have a board that is majority white. Our teachers and staff who participated in the survey for Equimetrics are not representative of our student population either. My assumption is that our teachers are majority white as well. So I think it's great that we have that data and that input, but I also think we need input from our students, as Trustee Gutierrez pointed out, from our families and parents, and that we as board should not alone set direction on this because we are not truly representative of our community. We're elected representatives, but we don't reflect the backgrounds of our broader community.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for seeing that and making that a priority in your comment.
Other comments from trustees? Trustee Gutierrez?
Yep. Man, that place is hot. Sorry. What I would like to see also is let's in terms of the resolutions, we also had one in support of DACA students. Let's not forget about that one either. But what I would like to see is to have some sort of community forum where we have a chance to either put on some sort of kind of like parent university, but I don't want to say it's multiculturalism university, but something to the aware of racial awareness, right? And one of the biggest complaints I get from many of the Latino families, or just the kids, especially the kids that I run into, is that they don't see enough teachers like themselves. And they like to see more teachers like themselves at the schools. I know that's a big ask because not everyone who is of a certain background or will apply to certain positions, or just the persons of interest who want to make a difference that way for the most part. By what I understand, because I have a lot of friends who are in this field as well and teaching in academia, they'll hit the Oakland and Berkeley's school districts, LA, San Francisco. They don't really necessarily think about Mountain View. And I get it. But I like to be able to have input from the students and from families, what they think and what they want to see as something that's important. I know one of the issues we have too that we could delve into is ethnic studies, especially at middle school. I think that would make sense. But what I want to get from this is Also teacher buy-in. So I'd like to see something going here with cultural competency. I know there's also a generation gap, and with that, there's a communication gap, and I want to bridge that gap. I know we've talked about it for the last 4 years, and I'm glad that we're finally here at this step where we could possibly do something, and I want to make it happen as soon as we can. So I'd like to also find out what you think suggestions should be for prioritization. But in the meantime, the humble suggestion I can make is a simple one. I want a forum where people can pitch in, from the middle school students to teachers in one area, to have them be able to voice their concerns and their priorities of race relations, racial understanding, implicit bias, now more than ever. Even if it's through Zoom, I don't care. I mean, it's time to be able to have these conversations and have a adequate understanding, if not a more genuine understanding of what are the issues that affect our kids. Because I think I agree with them. It made a big difference to me when I had someone of color teach me. And I got that, frankly, from an African-American woman who taught me, Mrs. Hanley, down in San Diego from New York. And then I got that from Mr. Serta, who was my Texas history teacher in San Antonio. I mean, they were incredible and because I could look to them and feel their passion and energy. But then there was a lot of shared lived experiences, right? Whereas here, you know, not much of the kids, by what I understand, are have that at Graham or at Crittenden, and I think that's an issue.
Thank you, Trustee Gutierrez. I'll concur with that. I think it'd be really valuable to get student feedback. I don't know if you knew Ms. Henderson, but before the shutdown, I want to say last fall, we had a student-led initiative to examine our dress code. It was completely led by students who brought the matter to the principal, brought it to the board, and we were able to successfully and quite quickly change that policy. A lot of the students, especially females, and people who just had a different way they wanted to dress, were getting policed by their bodies. And we wouldn't have known that if we're not a middle school kid at that school having experienced that. So I agree. I really would like to see this feedback extend to the kids. A new area of inquiry, if it's not already underway, would be in disciplinary measures. I know that that's often quite common, where you'll see certain groups getting either targeted. It might be because of subconscious bias for whatever reason. I'd like to know if that's occurring in our schools and see where it's happening and see what kinds of supports that we can utilize to improve that situation if it is something that's occurring. I'm really glad that you and the district are looking at sort of the implications and limitations in the current lottery system over at Stevenson. One of the numbers I heard, and I would love to get an annual look in the past history of that school on what the percentage of kindergartners are that are grandfathered in from other kids, which essentially omit any new family or other, kid that doesn't have a sibling there from going. Just to have that information to help us make informed decisions. If it's something like 75%, I can see how that trend over time would prohibit a more representative population at that site. Another thing that I don't know if it was touched upon, I don't believe I heard it, but some of the low numbers were also at the Graham and Latham preschool, which I thought was interesting. One of our preschools, I'm trying to visualize your graphic. One of them was quite high, and then two were like almost, exorbitantly low. So it'd be interesting to see what those differences are, and maybe survey the staffs as a whole. I don't know how that would look, and I don't want to prescribe it, but that's a very interesting difference, and I'm not sure if that's because of population or what other reason may be going on. Just looking at that initial data piece. That's all the comments I have for right now. I'll turn it over to other trustees.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Trustee Wheeler? Don't forget to unmute.
Thank you. Regarding teachers and staff, our district has said for quite a long time that they search for teachers and staff who fit the demographics of our district. So trying to find more Hispanic teachers. And year after year, we don't hire very many Hispanic teachers. And I know that there are Hispanic teachers that go through teaching teacher programs. So I'm hoping that with this new emphasis, that we will put even a stronger emphasis on trying to find teachers who look like our students. So that's one thing. Another is, and I brought this up with Board President Wilson and with Superintendent Rudolph, and then Trustee Gutierrez just brought it up. Regarding ethnic studies, there's a state effort going on right now to, it's in its second iteration of trying to come up with statewide criteria for ethnic studies. And I have asked whether individual trustees can, make comments to the state board, for example, about, what do you think of this ethnic studies framework? And, what I have said to Superintendent Rudolph is, I think it's really important that I think the second iteration of the ethnic studies proposal is head and shoulders above the first iteration. In particular, like, for example, we had some gentlemen who came from the Indian American community coming to our board, and they were going to boards all over the county to complain about the first iteration of the ethnic studies proposal that they felt was, negative stereotyping. And also, I'm very interested in speaking up about anti-Semitism. So this second iteration is a much stronger document that includes the history of Jewish people in a, I think, a more fair way. So I would like, I don't know if we want to do something as a board to support the second iteration of the ethnic studies proposal, or if now that I've said this in public, I can feel free to write my own letter to say I support this second draft, and I'm glad to see us going forward. And the third thing I want to say is I imagine this is part of just how you get the conversation started. But what does equity mean? What does it mean to different people? I would say to me, it means everyone feels valued. Everyone feels listened to. And, if this is what we're talking about, I say, let's have more of it. So, those are my thoughts.
That's a guarantee.
Trustee Conley?
Well, Trustee Blakely hasn't spoken yet, so.
Oh, Trustee Blakely, sorry.
No, my hand was waving out of focus. So I'm glad that I was concerned when I reviewed the presentation before the meeting that we were only interviewing the teaching side of the district staff for the survey. So I'm glad that included the CSEA workers as well. And I agree with most of what my colleagues have said, but in particular, 2 points. One, would love to get more teachers that look like our kids. That just goes without saying. And I think that's important for everybody, not just the kids that don't have teachers that look like them. It's important for the kids that do. So I'd love it if this initiative can help us with our recruiting. And then secondly, the point Trustee Wilson brought up about the discipline. My understanding based on, prior board meetings, prior years, is that there are some disparities in discipline, in particular at the middle schools. And really want to drill down and make sure that I don't know if we come up with a framework or whatever, but there's too many kids getting suspended. Those kids tend to be males of color. And I want to minimize suspensions, and I want fair treatment. I don't want the white kid getting the hall pass and the, Latino kid getting suspended. So I think there's probably more. We've talked about suspensions before at other board meetings, but would love to see fewer suspensions. And so if there's a way to tie that into this initiative, I would love to see that too. So I like a lot of the suggestions that you have, and I'm looking forward to bringing this along.
Yeah, me as well. Thank you, Trustee Blakely.
Trustee Conley?
Yes, thank you. As a side note, one of the things I'm interested about in the data you showed us about the overall scores for schools, my assumption, and I could be wrong about this, is that Mistral has the highest percentage of Latino teachers in our district. And so the fact that that school site scored the lowest is very concerning to me, because that is a large group of Latino educators in our district, and they do not feel that we are doing a good job with equity. And I think that's telling. If tonight is like pie in the sky moonshot kind of night where we lay it all out there and talk about the places that we want to go, because I'm hearing talk about curriculum and discipline, I'm just gonna try and throw a lot of things out there that I'm really interested in, and we'll see what, which spaghetti noodles stick to the fridge. I think that when we talk about all of this, I sort of alluded to community input, but I'm excited that we've put a diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging committee on a future agenda meeting, because I think that is the body that helps hold us accountable for this work. We have had culturally responsive training for teachers and staff for our district as part of our strategic plan for 5 years, and we have not achieved it. We have not done it. And that's not a knock on the strategic planning process, but we need to build in that accountability. And that's why I'm hoping, when we get to that conversation about that committee, that might be one way to do it. When we look at discipline numbers, when we disaggregate and we look at the impacts on students by race and by gender and by income as well, I think that the solution, or one of the ways that you address student discipline, it's disaggregating the data and being aware of it, but it's also this broader bucket of social emotional learning and trauma-informed and culturally responsive teaching practices, and then also restorative justice as an alternative to more punitive discipline like suspending students. So I'm interested in that whole, that's just a whole sort of system or umbrella of how to view children and how to interact with children that I think is the future, and I think is a good way to go for our students. And then I agree with adopting an ethnic studies curriculum in the future. There might not be a scripted curriculum, but we adopt an ethnic studies approach. I know we just adopted a history and social studies curriculum this year, a new one. But I also know that there are districts around us that are committing, K-8 districts, that are committing to pursuing ethnic studies. And we're going to see ethnic studies as a graduation requirement for high schools, but we can start that work young. We need to be an explicitly anti-racist organization. And the way we do that is we also help our teachers and our children and our families, all of us, learn together how to be anti-racist in our daily actions. So, I think there's a ton of work to do, but I'm really glad that we're starting this process.
Thank you very much, Trustee Conley.
Thank you, Trustee Conley. Trustee Gutierrez?
Yes, thank you. So I've got one more thought that came to mind. When I was growing up, I'm gonna say this was when I was in middle school in San Antonio, and then it happened over here in San Jose. I think it's James Lick High School. I'm not sure, but every year the school would support like a mentorship type day, right? Where you see persons of color in different professional roles and occupations and jobs, from construction workers to doctors and attorneys. And they were men and women of color. And that was also invaluable. So if we can think about maybe targeting something like that for our middle school students at both sites or what have you, that would be, I think, another different approach to how you look at and come to try and understand persons of different color and their ability to also make an impact as they get older, right? And if we could do that, I think that'd be wonderful, because there's plenty of talent out here in this community and in this county, in this area, that we can reach out to. And I think that we would have a lot of persons who would be interested in lending a hand.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Trustee Gutierrez. So I have one additional comment I'd like to add, and I know I've spoken to Dr. Rudolph privately about this, but we have a lot of recruiting that we often do, and I don't know how often we go to Cal State East Bay. It's my alma mater. It actually, the white population is in the minority. I just pulled up the statistics over there, and their teaching credential is one of their largest programs. So it's 10% African American, 22% Asian, 37% Latinx, and only 14% white, 5% multi-ethnicity. And again, their most popular baccalaureate programs are the teacher credentialing program. And on top of that, it's well known that it's a commuter school. So it's Cal State, so it's relatively affordable. People drive in and leave from all over the place who can still live at home. So they're likely rooted in families. So the cost of living in Mountain View may not be a prohibitive barrier for them to want to work here. I just don't know how strong our outreach efforts are at that specific campus, but it's a very diverse place that we should be looking at if we aren't already, in order to bring in teachers, as Trustee Gutierrez says, that look like the kids that they're teaching, which makes a huge difference.
And if I could pick you up on that, Tamara, let's not also forget that we have the upcoming construction of those 144 units. So if we can have a package deal when we go out and recruit to also incorporate the housing option that we'll provide in the future, I think that's a strong pull.
Absolutely. Thank you, Trustee Gutierrez. Are there other comments from trustees at this time? All right. Thank you so much, Ms. Henderson. Welcome aboard.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for your feedback. Thank you. I look forward to many board meetings.
Thanks so much. Okay, let me pull back up my agenda here. So it looks like we're now on to board updates. Do you have any board updates, Trustee Conley?
Yeah, I just wanted to share, I don't know if people have seen this going around, but I know the Los Altos School District has put out sort of an SOS, because there are teachers and staff for that school district who have had to be evacuated due to the fires. And I don't know if we have staff members within our school district who are also being evacuated, but Los Altos School District is actively looking for places for people to stay. And we may have community members in our employee community who might need support right now too. And so I'm hoping that's something we can address if possible, or try to help people where we can.
Thank you, Trustee Conley. Are there other updates?
Just a question for Trustee Conley. Who would be the contact? Would they call the district office at Los Altos if people?
Jeff Baer wrote a letter that has been put out. So I've seen it on Facebook. I haven't gone to their website to see if it's there.
Okay, so with no other trustee updates, items for future board agendas. I know I spoke in my one-on-one with Dr. Rudolph, and we both agreed that roughly a month, the board meeting that comes about a month after school has the distance learning has started, we will be looking at an update just to see how things are going. Everybody's curious, but we're only 4 days in, so we wanted to make sure we had enough time that had gone by that item will be coming up on a future agenda. Are there other items that trustees are interested in for future agendas? I saw Trustee Blakely's hand and then Trustee Wheeler.
I've brought it up before, Brown Act. I know that we were talking about waiting until after the election for training, but I would just encourage consideration and perhaps doing it sooner. And with the recorded format, it would be easy for the new trustees that get elected in November to review that. And I'm just wondering I'm thinking it might be timely to do it sooner.
Thank you, Trustee Blakely. Other trustees?
Wait. So Laura, are you making a motion where you need a second for that?
I think if we were going to put it sooner, you'd need 2 other people in addition to me, correct?
That's my understanding.
Okay, well, I'll sign on to that.
So I would say that anyone who's running for school board, I hope, is watching our board meetings now. And so I would be supportive of that, Laura.
Okay, so we have 3. Sounds good to me. And then another item was Trustee Conley, or I'm sorry, Trustee Wheeler.
Yeah, so
You muted yourself.
Hey, where are you?
here we go. Okay, thank you. Brought this up with Trustee Wilson and Superintendent Rudolph, and then talked about it with Superintendent Rudolph during my one-on-one, and I just brought it up right now about supporting the state proposal for ethnic studies. And Superintendent Rudolph was saying that maybe we could do a resolution for our next or an upcoming board meeting showing our board support for the ethnic studies proposal by the state. So I'm wondering if there's support for that.
Yeah, you've got my support.
I would second that. I would like to add that I hope that, well, maybe I have an additional agenda item, but it's more for, look, Dr. Rudolph is just stop talking. So we come up with more work. Maybe more towards, once we get through December, January, more towards the spring later, because we have a lot going on right now. But I would really be interested in discussing ethnic studies, a possible ethnic studies adoption within our district as a board. But I think we need to get a little further along in our equity conversations and developing some things around that, and then it might be something appropriate for the spring.
Okay.
In the meantime, I think you've got 2 supporters there, Ellen.
Thank you.
I think I heard 3 or
3.
4.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think we're all in. All right, there you go, marching orders.
Just a reminder, you still have a strategic plan that you have to do.
Yep.
Right on.
So let's just be mindful of everything.
We could place it in there.
I've seen a lot of emails about the ethnic studies curriculum proposal. Is there a canned resolution that's circulating on that?
I
No.
haven't seen one. Superintendent Rudolph, have you?
I haven't seen one, so I think if anything, what I was going to say is that we would send a letter of support, not so much a resolution.
Yeah.
I bet I could find you one if you're interested. I'm pretty
think the
sure I
letter
know
of
people who
support-
have passed some.
I
If
think
you
the
could-
letter of support would be as effective as a resolution. So, I'd be
If
fine
you
with
can find
that.
one and you want to send it, great. Otherwise, we'll draft a letter.
All right, if there are no additional items for future agendas, the future board meeting dates are listed on the agenda. And I'm toggling back and forth, so I'm saving paper here. If somebody's hand is up, I've missed it. Okay. I hear chirps. So at 9:14, we will adjourn this meeting of the Mountain View School